Of all the newfangled tools that we've added to the building in the last couple of years, probably the easiest to use is the Glowforge laser cutter. That doesn't mean, though, that it isn't an incredibly expensive and very delicate and precise tool. So I want you to treat it with the greatest respect, but I think it's a great tool for you to play around with and learn how to use. Basically what it is using a high-powered laser to engrave, etch, or cut out a variety of materials. And we'll talk about the kind of materials that you can use a little bit later. People are using it to make amazing, various crazy artworks that are just fantastic and whimsical with tiny little details that would have been incredibly difficult to do with traditional tools and materials. You can cut out and etch into leather. You can engrave the back of your MacBook. You can cut out and engrave acrylics, plexiglass, that sort of thing, and you can make the fanciest sushi you've ever seen. And of course, those nori sheets were engraved before they were wrapped around the sushi, but you get the idea. What we can do with it, of course, is to take our drawings, our CAD drawings or Illustrator drawings or whatever, and use them to cut out very precise, scaled, detailed parts for our models. And people are using them to make whimsical little dollhouse models. Architects are using them to make their architectural models, and we can basically use the laser cutter to cut out all of the same kind of materials that we traditionally do with our theater models, with one notable exception that I'll talk about at the end. But the frustration of cutting out cardstock and doing a little quarter-inch scale French window, and you can barely see what you're doing, and the knife slips a little bit, and you cut it in half, and it's so frustrating and time-consuming and tedious. All that kind of delicate work can be done so quickly and easily with the laser cutter. That's why we got it. So let's talk about how to use the SOU Glowforge. So the first thing you want to do is come up with your artwork. And I recommend using Vectorworks because we have it in the studio, of course, and you're probably already using it to generate your drafting or your 3D model. Now, of course, you can use Illustrator, you can use Inkscape, all sorts of tools that you can draw very precisely with. Anything like that is fine, but I recommend using Vectorworks especially if you're already working with it in your model. I do recommend copying and pasting from your main drawing into a blank document so that if you delete something that you're going to regret later on, this way you've got a copy of it, because the only thing you want on the screen when you export this file are things that you want the Glowforge to cut. Now you can, of course, engrave with the Glowforge, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're only going to worry about cutting. So if you've got a line on the screen, it's telling the machine to cut that line. So I recommend that you go through and make those lines of the finest line weight. And I usually go in up and take the solid fill out and just set it to none. I don't necessarily know that you have to do that, but I get good results when I do. If you are uploading the file and it never stops uploading, it should take anywhere from about a minute to maybe 10 or 12 minutes if it's a really complicated file to upload your document to get ready to be cut. And if it never finishes, it may be there's a problem in your original document. Go back to your original file and look for any tiny little shapes. Now your ink printer is just going to ignore little shapes like that. It's just going to go along and print it and just be fine. But what the laser cutter is trying to do is trace every little path. It's trying to follow every little line. And if it encounters a little twist in a line or a little tiny shape somewhere that you can't even see unless you zoom in, that it's trying to follow, but it's too small for it to handle, it'll kind of freeze. So the problem is probably in your original document. Zoom in and hunt around a little bit and see if you haven't created a tiny little island somewhere that you need to get rid of. And then you're pretty much ready to upload it. I recommend going to File, Export, and export to a PDF. Now the laser cutter will read a variety of image files, but it's much more likely to see a JPEG or a PNG or something as something that you're telling it to engrave as opposed to cut. The PDF is going to be in scale, it's going to be nice and sharp, so I really recommend exporting to a PDF. And then of course open up your PDF before you upload it to make sure that it looks like what you expect. And when you have the image ready to go, the next thing that you're going to need to do is turn on the machine. So go into the studio, find the machine, reach over into the back right hand corner, and there's a little toggle switch over there where that blue arrow is pointing. Flip that switch and you should immediately see the lights come on and hear the fan start running. And if you don't, make sure that it's plugged in. There's a power strip that it's plugged into. Make sure that that's turned on and you should be ready to go. And then you can go to any one of the computers in the studio. You can use your own computers. You can even do this on your phone. And what you're going to want to do is go to the Glowforge sign-in. So just type this phrase, Glowforge sign-in, into Google. You'll find the link. You only need to do that the first time you log in. And then you're going to use your SOU email as your login ID, and then it's going to prompt you to give it a password, and you can do that then, and that's your ID. And once you log into that, you will be able to come to this page. Now, if it doesn't recognize your email, I have to actually invite you to use the tool. So if it doesn't recognize your email, just let me know, and I will add you to the list of the emails that it's expecting to log in. Then you're going to see this page on your screen, and you have the ability to look at all the work that other people have done, but please don't buy anything that you're not willing to pay for. Some of this is free, and some of this is for purchase, like many of these kind of sites. And you can see there's two files that I have uploaded in the past over here. This circle I keep around just as a little test file, and this is a little brick stencil that I use a lot. We have two little buttons here that we're looking at. One is upload and one is trace. Now in theory you can just draw right on the material and it can scan it on the actual cutting bed, and then it'll show you those lines, and it'll kind of guess the lines that you've drawn there, and you can use that trace function to cut out or etch those lines. Now that's a lot better for engraving if you want to draw your signature on something and use that to kind of, sign the corner of your little leather notebook or whatever. It's better for that. I really don't recommend the trace function for what we're trying to do. You're better off uploading the PDF that you've already created. So don't think that the trace function means you don't have to deal with drawing the drawing. It's still going to be a lot better. You're going to have a lot less frustration by uploading the file. And then it will appear right here on the list, and you select the one that you want, and then you're going to go ahead and go to print it. And then you'll be taken to this screen. And what this actually is a photograph. This is an image of the camera under the hood of the Glowforge. Here's the little piece of chipboard that I dropped down on there. You don't have to worry about squaring it. Just set it kind of in the middle of the cutting area. And there's, when you're dealing with other kinds of cutters or 3D printers, you got to sort of zero things out and find the home corner and tell it where things are. It doesn't care about that. It just looks at the screen and sees where it is. And then it gives you a little outline of your drawing here. Now there's three little parts of the drawing right here because it's brought in the walls and the window as one thing that it sees that we want to cut out. But it doesn't know what we want to do with these louvers. It's given us an etching version and a cutting version of that. So we're actually going to tell it here in a second to ignore this one. We don't want to etch it, we want it to cut it out, but it's sort of split it up. And sometimes it'll do that. It'll break the drawing up into a couple of different parts, and that's fine. As long as you move this thing around without clicking on this first and then moving it separately, it'll keep them all aligned, kind of grouped together. You can rotate it by clicking on this button and moving it around. I don't recommend grabbing any of these little control handles here because that will resize the shape and then it'll throw it out of scale. Don't put it too close to the edge because this is just a little camera. It's not super precise. If you put it too close to the edge, you might actually end up having a little bit of your material kind of overshooting the edge, and then it'll be a little smaller than you want. But position it wherever you want, and when you're ready to go, you can come in and enter these settings. Here it's asking us to enter some settings. So the settings that it's wanting us to enter are how fast and how powerful the laser needs to be, and that can be determined by the kind of material that we're cutting. Now when you click on this, like I clicked on this little button right here, it has a sort of the last material used here. That you can ignore that. What you're going to want to do is click on this little arrow over here to manually enter some settings. Notice that it says cut up here. That's what we want. We don't want engrave or score. We want cut, and we will want to ignore this extra piece over here, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we click on this little guy here, and then it takes us to this screen here where we have our speeds and feeds here. This is how fast the tool is going to move, and this is how much power we're going to give to the laser. There's also the number of passes and how thick the material is. So this is a good setting here. This is going, kind of a medium speed, and it's giving it a lot of power but not full power, and that's fine. You could probably push this up to really fast and full power and get away with one pass. There's no like absolute right settings in here. There is, however, a little keychain of materials that I have tried out over the years. Those will have the speeds and feeds on there. So you can just look at the material, find the one that you want to cut, and it'll tell you my guess as to what the right speed is and the right power on that. Now the things to be aware of is you want to be cutting very quickly and low power for thin flammable material. So if you're cutting fabric, you're cutting paper, those kinds of things, you don't want to be going very slowly, very hot, because that may set your material on fire. So that's not a good idea. So you want to be going as fast as possible. That's good anyway, because you want your work done faster. But it's probably, in some cases, better to go fast with 2 passes, and that number of passes means how many times it goes around the outline of the shape. So if it's not quite cutting all the way through, try just a second pass and maybe speed it up a little bit and maybe drop the power down a little bit. So having it cut at 80% twice really fast is going to be better than cutting at full power going slower once. You're going to get more scorching, kind of soot and that kind of things on there. You're always better going faster rather than too slow with some materials. And again, there's so many different kinds of materials that there's no like I just made a really blanket statement that's kind of impossible depending on the other kind of materials. But for the kind of things that you're going to be wanting to be cutting out, these kind of paper-based products, fast and kind of medium power is usually best, or use the recommended settings that I've already come up with. the last part here, the engraved version of it, where it's telling us like, okay, well, what kind of engraving do you want to do? And it'll be talking about lines per inch or dots per inch or all kinds of things. It'll look very different than that last screen. I should have grabbed a screen grab of it, but I didn't. So you can just ignore that and tell the laser cutter to ignore it as well by clicking on this button. And then it'll just say, okay, fine, I won't bother about that. I'll only cut these out. And then you can see the speed settings that are here for the parts that you've already told it to do. And you can have them be separate. So here I did 380 for this first one, and I did 580 on the second one. I may go a little bit faster on these to see how that works. And then also notice down over here that I have the height of this at 0.03 inches. Now don't worry about entering it right here. 0.03 is how thick this cardstock is. You can use the little digital calipers to measure something that you don't know, or you can go off the measurements that I've put on the little sample books there. But don't worry about entering it right here, because as soon as we hit print, it's going to ask us to do that again anyway. But when we're all set up and ready to go, it's going to look like this. We're going to get this teal outline along all of our lines, and we're ready to hit the print button. We're happy with all of our settings. So when I click on that, it's going to bring this little menu up in here. It's going to say, oh, this is not a certified material. And basically what it's talking about, uncertified material. Don't panic about that. They sell all these materials that have little QR codes on them that the scanner scans so it knows exactly what settings to use. But we're not going to be using a lot of those kinds of materials. So you're just going to say, I want to use an uncertified material. That sounds scarier than it is. Just click on this, and then it's going to tell you, well, how thick is it? And that's where you're going to put in that height on it. So it's going to ask you for that anyway. So don't worry about putting it in the first time. And then you're ready to go. It's going to say preparing your document. You'll see this spin for a little bit. And then when it's done, you'll see this screen in here, magic time. It'll tell you how long it's going to take to cut it out. 1 minute, 18 seconds. That's pretty good for cutting this out. And then it's going to tell you you should be using or you should be buying our stuff again. Okay, whatever. And then what you need to do is walk over to the machine and click on that little button here. But before you click on that button, I want you to look behind the machine at the wall and behind the machine where the vent material is. Make sure that both of those are connected, otherwise you'll fill the room full of smoke, and that will be bad. It's unlikely that those will have come off, but double check before you push the button to make sure, and then you're ready to come back and push the little glowing button. It's kind of pulsating a little bit. There's our little chipboard lying on the crumb tray inside, and we're ready to go. Don't watch the laser. It's okay if you kind of glance down at it. You're not going to go blind instantly, but don't sit there and follow the bright little light around. That's not good because it is a laser. But it'll start cutting out your material fairly quickly, and don't panic if it's not, it does, sometimes it chooses strange paths, what it decides to cut out. It looks like it skipped something, but it'll come back and it'll do it at the very end. Be careful that your material is lying nice and flat. If it's kind of bowing or cupping, it'll move it closer or farther away from the laser than it should, and that can throw off the focus, and it might not cut it properly. So it wants to be lying nice and flat on the crumb tray there. And then when it's done, you'll hear the fan will rev up to really high speed. It's venting all the smoke out of the chamber, and then you'll see your material lying there on the crumb tray. Go ahead and lift up the hood, and you can grab your material. This little trick about wrapping a little masking tape around your finger to get all of the cutout bits out without having to pick them up one at a time with your fingers is a real clever trick. And then you have your cutout pieces ready to go, and there's a second set in the background being cut out. It's so fast and useful for that. So let's talk about what you can and can't cut out. Basically, I really think that you're probably going to be using chipboard or illustration board, paper, cardstock is great, that kind of thing. Stick with those paper products to begin with. It can, of course, cut acetate. It can cut acrylic, which is like plexiglass. It'll cut out fabrics and leathers. And you can cut out plywoods that are 1/4 of an inch or less, and any kind of softwoods, basswoods, balsa woods, those kind of things. It's actually a lot more. You can cut out quite a lot of things. Now, what you can't cut out is actually foam core. Now, you may see foam core listed on a lot of the material charts for it, but the company doesn't recommend cutting foam core because of the plastic in the inside of it. The plastic inside of it can actually be flammable when it is cut, and it can put off a flammable gas. It's certainly carcinogenic, which is not good anyway, but it's also can be flammable. And so if you don't know what you're doing, if your settings are wrong, you could actually catch it on fire, and that would be very bad. So even though foam core is something we very commonly use to build our theater models, I recommend just grabbing your X-Acto knife, just go ahead and cut out the foam core. The good news is you're not going to be cutting fussy little details out of foam core. Foam core is for building your model box, it's for platforms, it's ramps, it's kind of big blocky stuff anyway. So it's not the best material to be cutting fine details out. Please don't cut foam core. It'll cut 1/8 inch masonite. We have a lot of masonite lying around the building because we use it in the scene shop, but don't be tempted to grab some 1/4 inch masonite. It will cut it, but it has to go so many passes at such high power, it just looks like charcoal when it's done. It burns it up so badly that it really, because it's so hard and tempered, the masonite is really a little too much for it to handle. You can cut 1/8 inch masonite, but the 1/4 inch is just it's just too thick. And then any kind of metal glass, it's not going to cut those anyway. You can etch into metals and glasses and things if you know what you're doing, but please don't because you don't know what you're doing yet. Any kind of highly reflective materials is going to bounce the laser back at itself, and that's going to cause problems. So just don't try to cut any of those sort of materials. Just stick to paper products for the time being, and you'll be fine. And of course, you can just Google it, just search, Glowforge settings or whatever, something like that. There's a lot of people in the community that are using the tool, that are uploading all this sort of information. It's a new tool. It's not been around for very long. So people are kind of exploring with it, messing with it, and they're sharing a lot of the knowledge that they are discovering. So here's one of many Google Sheets that are out there with various kinds of materials. It'll give you some of the feeds and speeds, the power settings and the speed settings, and little notes about that can be very useful. So feel free to look into that as well if you're not sure about the various kinds of material settings. When you are finished, please clean out the tray. You can take out the little crumb tray and shake it out. You can take the shop vac over to it, vacuum out all the little confetti bits. Please don't leave a mess of waste material inside the machine when you are done. And of course, clean up the mess around the machine. Just because you cleaned out the inside of the machine doesn't mean that all the waste material that you've left lying around the room doesn't also need to be cleaned up. So please clean up your mess. Remember to shut off the machine, and then eventually, when your model's all done, no rush on that, but please go back and remember to clean out the files on the upload page when you are finished with them, and then you are good to go. So I hope that you will try out using the Glowforge. Please ask me any questions that you have. I recommend doing your first cut with me there to show you how to do it, and then this is really much more for reviewing if you come back next term or something and you've forgotten how to do things, but I please ask that you do your first cut on the Glowforge with me in class, and otherwise I hope you have lots of fun.